All right, so I'm here in the hospital visiting a friend, and I had the idea that I could take this opportunity to do some recording about various aspects of my life. And I said to Brian, why don't you just ask me some questions as they come up, and we'll see what happens. So, Brian, what's on your mind? You know me.
Well, let's start by figuring out when and where you were born.
All right. I was born May 1st, 1953, in Hearst, Ontario. So Hearst is far away from Sudbury, further north from Sudbury, further north from Timmins and Cochrane's and all that stuff. Just south of James Bay a little bit, northern Ontario.
Okay, so in Hearst, Ontario, you were born in a barn or at home or in a hospital?
I was born in a hospital. I don't think the hospital is still there, but I was born in a hospital. That's for sure.
Now, you've had some hospital issues, medical issues since then. When did they first appear?
I was born very evidently disabled. My hands were twisted, my elbows were twisted, my hips were were dislocated, my feet were looking like club feet. Basically, all of my extremities were very, very deformed. It was very evident when the doctor, when I was born, the first words weren't, I'm making this up, but I'm assuming something like this was said. His first words weren't, "Oh, you've got a lovely baby boy." I'm sure the first words were, "Oh, he's not normal. He's very physically disabled." Except that might have been in French, because in Hearst, there's a lot of French up there. So that could have been, "Hey, ton enfant là, il est pas normal." Ça se peut. It was like that.
Yeah. So you don't. This is all secondhand because you're not able to retain that sort of stuff. But your mother is probably the person who's reporting all of this and giving it to you.
So I actually have a 4x5 envelope that my mother wrote a note to herself on. Just like a small envelope. And it outlines, that I was born on May 1st. It says, it has my birth time at 3 a.m. It says that who the doctor was, who was around at the time in the hospital. It says that I was baptized when I was 4 days old. It says that on May 11th, I was on an airplane. They drove me to Kapuskasing, and then I was on an airplane to Toronto.
At what age?
At 11 days old.
Wow.
And they said that the little note to herself indicated that I was born very crippled, but that they loved me in spite of all that, and that I would be fine. And that was the very beginning of my departure from Hearst to living in the hospital for sick children in Toronto.
Now, in your personal memory, when does that kick in? You're having now to rely on scraps of paper and hearsay. Is there an era, an age when you can remember your own memories starting to cover history? Or are you having to rely on other people's stories, not until you're 27, but can you guess roughly the age when you became the owner of your own memory?
I have some very vivid memories of recovering in the recovery room and puking my guts out because they used ether at the time.
Yeah.
And every operation began with ether, and you got a lot of ether. I got a lot of ether because my surgeries were very long, some of them.
Yeah.
And the emptying of my stomach was often the case when I came out of surgery.
Yeah.
It was forever. And I think the ironic thing is that the last surgery I had was when I was 13, they just started using a needle. And, the doctor said, hey, this is going to be the first time we're using this on you. You count backwards from 10, and it's like, 10, 9, 8, boom, you're out, right? But they still use gas, but the elimination of the gas mask going over your face, and that's awful.
Yeah.
And then coming out, emptying your guts out, puking is.
Yeah.
So I remember that. I remember a lot of that for sure.
And you said the age when that happened?
I don't know when, but
Oh.
it was. I remember that. I also remember when they would come and take me, like I'm visiting you in a hospital right now, in a bed not dissimilar from this. They would wheel in a transfer bed, and the transfer bed would be a bed that's very narrow that they would wheel you onto, and they would wheel you from the room and, go down to the elevator, down to the surgery floor.
Yeah.
And the ceiling in here is solid white panels. The ceiling in the hospital was white panels with holes drilled in them everywhere. So holes drilled in the white panels everywhere. It was just an aesthetic thing. And that's a memory I have, lying in bed, looking up at the lights going by and the ceiling going by, and then going into the elevator and the bump of the elevator, and then going down or up. I think the operating room might have been up a floor or two, but I was on the 5th floor.
Okay.
And the bump of the elevator, and then coming out of the elevator, and as soon as the elevator door would open, I would start vomiting because I became allergic.
Anticipation?
I became allergic to the smell of ether. Even now, if I walk into an operating theater or a floor, like visiting you,
Yeah.
if the elevator would open accidentally on the operating floor and there's the smell of ether, I would have a really hard time containing myself to not vomit.
Just a little time out. Is ether still a drug of choice for?
No, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I know that they use a spray ether to start cars in the wintertime. It's a smell that's very similar to ether. And if that's around and I smell that, I'll have a very hard time holding my gut in. The real thing.
Well, you've had a lot of experience. So ether went until guesstimate.
Well, my last surgery was I was in 66.
Okay. So Richard and we're in 39, so I'm 40, early 40s, and he's a couple of years behind me. So it's a more primitive time, but I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't know. No, I took us off the track. Can you remember where we were?
Yeah, so the recovery room is an interesting thing because it's not like waking up. In my opinion, recovering from a long surgery, the ones that I remember, it's not like waking up in a recovery room. It's your brain comes into consciousness really slowly.
Yeah, yeah.
And the nurses are coming by regularly asking, Jimmy, are you okay?
Uh-huh.
And Jimmy, are you okay?
Yeah.
And eventually you hear them, right? And you can respond, yeah, I'm okay. I'm here. I'm hi, or you respond, right? You respond in a way that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And then and they keep you in there until they're checking your vitals all the time. They're checking your heart, your blood pressure. They're checking everything.
Mm-hmm.
They don't send you up to the ward until you're stabilized.
Right. But each and every one of your surgeries was different.
Yes.
And they probably only do one at a time.
I have had several times when I had major surgery involving body casts. They would do my hips, and so they have to immobilize the body so you can't move.
Right.
So, if we're going to immobilize the hips, we may as well do something else at the same time.
Oh.
So they would fix a leg or an ankle or something else at the same time. So I've had several surgeries.
So as you came out of the surgery or out of the operating room, presumably different parts of you, depending on the amount of anesthetic, would come back to consciousness. So you might, for example, have a shoulder and an ankle in the same surgery, and they'd come back not concurrently. separately, perhaps.
Well, it's the consciousness in the brain that allows you to feel anything, not in the body. So if you're knocked out, you're not going to feel anything until consciousness returns.
But that consciousness might not be simultaneously for both bits. I mean, I was wondering if there would be multiple stages of consciousness.
I think you have one consciousness. In any case, I never had. In your case, just to clarify, I've never had surgery on my shoulder,
Oh, that's.
but it could have been a wrist or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And then you would have had an indeterminate and variable period of not reconstruction, but waiting until that hand or that elbow or that knee had been strong enough to be enable you to try to work on it and walk on it.
Right.
And do it. That would be, especially if you had multiple surgeries at one time.
Yeah.
How would they know when you were ready to go back home and play or whatever?
So with this, when I was younger, what I remember is what I have memories of is like, in school, and I would go to school for September
Yep.
and October typically, and then I would be in the hospital in Toronto. So my family had moved from Hearst to Stratford by the time when I came out of the hospital the first time.
Why Stratford?
An hour and a half away from Toronto.
From
My
St.
father
Kitts?
my father was able to get a job in
Oh.
Stratford
Okay.
as industrial commissioner. So I would be at school till September, October kind of thing.
Yeah.
November kind of time frame, I would go to the hospital, and I'd be in there for a week while they need to get a stabilization. What's his status health wise?
Yeah.
So a week, 5 days. While they get the pre-surgery.
And you're in a hospital room solo or?
No, 4 or 5 kids.
Okay.
These are all wards.
Yeah.
And then after 4 or 5 days, once they figured out, okay, this is his baseline health, right? The heart, the pee, the poop, all of this stuff,
Yeah,
right? And then boom, okay, we're gonna fix his wrist, right? So I'd go into the surgery, and so that would be the first thing. I'd have come out, have a cast on.
May I interrupt? Did you and your not so much you, but your parents and maybe a local doctor have any input into the sequence or the priorities of the various surgeries?
A local doctor, no. Parents. This is the time when acquiescence to power was very strong.
Dr. God.
Yeah. So I can tell you another story about that another time. But so no, there was not a lot of input. So to go back to your question, I would have my wrist operated on, and that would be a cast, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then that cast might be on there for 3 months. So rather than send me home with a big cast,
Yeah.
immobilized, right, they would wait a month and then do another surgery. And then I'd have 2 surgeries. And then the cast would come off the wrist. So I'd be basically in the hospital for
2 or 3 months.
till May,
Yeah.
right? I may be home for my birthday, which was May 1st,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then the doctors insisted that I be home for the summer. So I'd be outside all summer long,
Yeah.
right? So my sister Elise, who's deceased, she wrote in a high school scrapbook that by the time I was 9, I had spent half my life in the hospital.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot. So
Because I was imagining modest.
in out.
Little.
Yeah, no,
So
36
these are brutal big ones.
These are big operations.
Oh, so it's not. Not so much a finger or a kneecap.
No.
So it's getting the skeleton or
Yeah,
body
it's
parts.
rebuilding the skeleton.
So each one of them would be not like a 2 week recovery, maybe a 2 month or a 4 month.
Yes. So, for example, I was born with dislocated hips. So they were dislocated because there was no socket. So you have a ball at the end of your
Yeah.
femur, I guess, and there's no place for it to rest, right?
Yeah.
So my doctor, Robert Salter, anybody listening, if they go Google his name, they'll find out he's very famous for developing a procedure for rebuilding a socket if one is missing, and he developed that surgery on me. I'm actually in his book that he wrote on procedures for orthopedics.
Of course, if it was so rare, he'd have to invent.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So they took spare bone parts from the pelvic area, they ground some off, they took pieces off, and because it all came from the same general area, it all grew at the same general speed. And they were able to pin it together and let it re-adhere back into place. I'm really telling a very high level view of it, and then get the socket into it. And then if it wasn't right, they would know when I tried to walk it wasn't in the right place or things weren't exactly right. So the next time they'd redo it again.
So grind her down or glue it up.
Yeah. So it wasn't until I was basically 4.5 years old that I actually was able to walk.
I'm surprised it could happen that early with all of the fix-ups they had to
Well,
do.
the other thing they had to do is they had to fuse my ankles because
Fuse?
my ankles don't bend at the ankle because I
you're
would just
talking-
flop over. I would just flop forward because the tendons weren't there and the muscles weren't there to hold me up. So I would stand up and I just fall forward. Boom. I would just fall forward. The ankles, So I'd stand up and boom, tip over forward. Right. So okay, that wasn't a good idea. And
perchance, each one was not a symmetry of the other.
Yeah, yes. So they fused my ankles and they fixed my hips and
You fused your ankles. I'm not sure I understand that.
they don't bend. They glued them together. They
Oh.
pinned them together. They don't move.
Okay.
Like you can flex your ankle, you can push your
Yeah.
toes down, you can make it go straight.
Yeah.
Mine is straight.
Oh, okay. So
Here, push it. It doesn't work. You can't do it.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's rigid
It's rigid.
and identical to the other one. Or
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
Not?
The other one, yeah, same.
Uh-huh.
So fusing the ankle, putting a socket, getting the right configurations, allowed me to walk.
You've been served by some very talented people because they're having to wing it.
To say the least.
Yeah. Wowzers. Huh. This is going to be a good book. You better get this thing out.
That's what we're doing.
You've got a debt to your parents for persistence, to the hospital people for tolerance and creativity, and to this particular doctor
Yes.
for just the mental facilities to envisage and then try. You got to be brave working with a kid too to
Yeah.
try this out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everybody was flying by the seat of their pants because
Yeah.
they didn't really know what was going on. I mean, the biggest challenge for them at the beginning was they needed to figure out if I had any intelligence.
And how do you do that?
How do
with
you
a
do that?
one-year-old?
Right. So my mother, again, this is the story I'm told.
Yeah.
My mother apparently saw me complaining in my early, like in the first 4 or 5 days, about the squeaking of the clothesline outside the hospital window.
Oh, yeah.
So the sound of would upset me, and I would lick my head, anyway, she knew that I was okay in my head.
Uh-huh.
So she knew that.
Yeah. But they have to be comfortable with vision, hearing. Were any of those basic senses messed with?
No.
Oh, so it's the hard bones that were and the muscles.
It's all orthopedics, yeah. So the condition for those who are listening is called arthrogryposis, multiplex congeniti. So arthrogryposis means stiff joints.
Okay.
Multiplex means many. And congeniti means from birth. So I have stiff joints.
Yeah.
They're stiff because the tendons don't grow. So
Yeah.
the tendons stop the bones from growing at the joint area.
Yep.
They wrap it, the whole thing's tight. So because of that, the joints, like a tree, I always say, like a tree growing into a brick wall, it's not going to not grow. It's just going to either push the wall down if it can. If it can't push the wall down, it will grow sideways.
Yep.
So that's what happened.
And symmetry side to side, left foot and the right
I have
foot?
no symmetry whatsoever.
Oh, so the left ankle and right ankle not necessarily identical.
No, my hands are different.
And so separate operations for each ankle?
Yes,
What a genius.
they're very
doctor you
different.
had.
They're just every part of me. Each part deformed differently, so each part needed to be reassembled differently.
Yeah. Where's your father and all that? You mentioned your mother being the memory book.
So my father was working as an industrial commissioner in Stratford.
Industrial commissioners, and I can guess, but what does it really mean?
His job was to bring factories, industry into Stratford, Ontario. So Stratford is in the agricultural belt, southern Ontario. In Ontario, they had a rail train, the CNR, Canadian National Railway, was going there. And the municipality figured that we should be an industrial town, we should be an industrial hub. So to do that, you need to have somebody who's going to bring industry in. So my father had a degree in, a bachelor's degree in commerce, BCom or something like that, from University of Toronto, I think, or someplace in Toronto. And he heard about this position, and he got hired.
And of course, this is when he's looking for a location closer to the big hospital,
Yes.
presumably.
Yes,
So he's on the prowl.
yes, yeah. So this opportunity came up, and I think by the time I really came out of the hospital, they had moved to Southern Ontario. So the family was a French-speaking family to a large extent in Northern Ontario. My father was Irish, English. My mother was French, Quebec, French Ontario, Franco-Ontarian. My brothers and sisters primarily spoke French. They did speak English at the home, but they were educated in French. Everything was in French at home.
But wait a minute. You're firstborn?
I'm last born.
Oh, lastborn. Okay. Oh, well, there's a lot of information there. Lastborn, then your parents have had normal kids.
Yeah.
And they know
Define normal. I'm normal. Come on.
they've seen the evolution of kids.
Yes.
And they've seen it for several other kids.
Yeah.
Like you've had four
Others.
youngers. So your parents are wise from experience.
Yes.
So when you come along with a multiplicity of stuff, they know right from the get-go that this isn't normal because they've got a spectrum of 4 of their own models.
Yes.
So that gives them a really valuable head start to get you the tools and the helpers
Yes.
because they know what normal is.
Yes.
They're heroes too.
Yes. There are a lot of heroes in here.
Yeah,
There are a lot.
yeah. And of course your elder siblings would have been robbed is not the right word, but there's only so much TLC going in a family. You would need more, so they would get less.
I assume that to be the case.
It has to be.
I assume. Yeah.
There's 24 hours in everybody's day. Mums and dads, especially. Is your mom holding a job as well as being a mom?
No. No.
Okay, so your kids are the full-time job.
Classic mother at the time. In the
Yeah.
50s and 40s,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. That was the routine.
But the fact that the kids moved from Hearst down to Stratford is on account of you.
Yes.
Or some of them you're the youngest, so some of them are already out of the nest.
No, my I was 0, right?
Yeah.
My eldest brother was 10.
Oh, so that's the only gap.
He was born in 43. So in 10 years, they had 5 kids.
I know. Well, that was more or less what my parents were doing.
Yes.
Okay. You got the gist of a very interesting story here. Can the siblings help you out? You mentioned one of them's no longer with you.
Well, I mean, could they at the time, or
No, no.
could they help me out? Oh, with the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have two. I have two left. I have a brother and the two next to me. So the eldest two are gone.
Yeah. Okay.
And the next two to me are alive. They're in Prince Edward Island. When I start telling stories, when questions come up about what happened here or when did this, or I'll talk to them, for some of the details, fill in the blanks.
Sure.
But I haven't found it necessary to do that because the story isn't so much about the details. It's more about new words that are on people's vocabulary these days, like resilience and perseverance, and it's more about those words than it is about. It wasn't January. It was March. It wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody cares about those details.
But you. I mean, if you were going to put them on a sketch, you could pretty well pinpoint the timing, and you could pinpoint the nature of the change of the medical situation.
No. I have no ability. I don't think they even have any idea. I mean, they would have been like, John is 4 years older than I am, right? So, I mean, what would he have known what surgery I'd come home with when he was 6? Jim comes back home and he's got another cast on. He wouldn't have is it a leg, a foot, an arm, or who knows, right?
And chances of getting the medical records are nil, eh?
I think they're nil. And one time I went to the hospital to ask to see if I could see my records. They said, we can't carry them out. We have to put them in a wheelchair or something. It's just like 36 operations. These are huge records, right? It's like, plus all the x-rays and
did
plus...
they admit having them?
They have them.
Oh.
The Hospital for Sick Children. So maybe by now, those in the archives, who knows?
Well, would they even retain them?
I don't know.
Because that could be a really fertile source.
It'd be a source of...
For the factual crap.
It'd be a source of information for the factual crap, but I'm not sure that it would be helpful for the gist of the story. Because if I get too tied down in the details about, okay, this surgery was on this date and this time, and then this surgery allowed me to do this, it's like I don't think it would be helpful. I think there are.
Well, I can envisage for you, at a minimum, a little one-page chart with dots for each of the surgeries, which would themselves tell a ton about the intensity of the care. Did you say 13 or did I make
36.
that up? 36.
36.
Well, that's already...
So imagine this, okay? You're in the hospital right now. Every time a doctor comes to see you, they write down notes. They take notes, right? Mm-hmm. Those go onto your file, right? So when I was in the hospital, same, right? So 36 operations. By the time I was 9, I spent half my life in the hospital. That's just 9. And I had more surgery until I was 13, right? Imagine how many notes there are. Imagine how many x-rays are in that file. Imagine how many details of the surgeries are in that file. Imagine how hard it would be to ask somebody to go back in there and find out.
I think it's a very iffy assumption that they're even in existence.
So I have probably 300, but I was about to say emails. I have about 300 letters from the hospital, from one of the nurses to my mother, letters and telegrams. When I would go into the surgery, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, Jimmy's just gone into surgery, I'll let you know when he's come out. So that's a telegram.
Oh, really?
A telegram, right? Okay.
Wow.
Well, because my mother wanted to know what was going on, right?
Yeah.
So 5 hours, 10 hours later, Jimmy's out of surgery. So operation was a success. He's in recovery. 2 hours later, Jimmy's up on the floor with the nurses. They're walking around with him. He's having a good time. They're taking care of him. So my mother would know, A, when I went in, B, I came out okay, C, I'm back up in the ward, and D, the nurses are taking care of me.
Wow.
I mean, think
That's
about
even more than I expected.
think about the fact that when I was born far away from the hospital. I was born in Northern Ontario.
Yeah.
So it's not like this my parents could just come in and visit.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So this nurse Alice Boxell, her name is, she kind of took me on as a special case.
Clearly, yeah.
Yeah, she took me on as a special case. So every time I would come out of the surgery, she would send a note. And then she would write letters. I have hundreds of letters from her.
Wow.
The nurses, I saw the nurses visiting Jimmy today on the ward. They're curling his cute little blonde hair. Here's a snippet of his hair.
Oh, that's a very special person. And she's presumably deceased?
Oh yeah. So I can add this into the story here.
Mm-hmm.
So she wrote all these letters.
And they exist still?
Yeah, I have them.
Okay, well there's...
None of these letters outline what happened. None of them say, today they straightened his left wrist out. Today they did his left ankle. Today he did nothing.
Oh, because it was already known.
None of that was ever done. None of that was ever said. It was just about...
Well, but they're dated.
They're dated.
And you know your own
And that,
surgical dates.
and basically that's from... Those letters end... They end... I don't get them for the whole time I'm in there.
No.
They stop eventually.
Yeah. But you've still got a passel of them. And
But I hear what you're
the
saying.
chronology is there.
I think that I hear what you're saying, that you think it's important, and I think you'll have to talk to other people. And maybe this is a good question for the people who are listening. If there's anybody still listening, God bless you. If there's anybody still listening, if they could put a comment, if they think it's worth me trying to figure out the dates of when these surgeries occurred, if it would be helpful in the story.
I guess a fundamental question, which you've probably already worked on, is for whom are you writing this? Is it for your own just edification to capture it all down before you're all demented? Or is it for their information or what? Who are the audience and why?
So there are many answers to that question. The first answer to the question is a story that I think you may have read that I had posted on the internet. It was about my first 12 days growing up in the hospital in Toronto. I think you may have read it.
I may or I
You
may
commented on it that you have read it.
Okay, well, there's the answer.
So you have read it.
Okay.
That
kind of hard to have a good conversation with somebody with dementia. Eh?
that I'm going to ignore that. That story I wrote when I was 18 years old.
Okay.
And I wrote that story. I won there was a creative writing contest when I was 18 years old in high school, and I wrote a brief autobiography, maximum number of words or pages or whatever.
Yeah.
I squeezed it into that, and I won first place.
Well, obviously, with that.
So I got $1,000 back in 1967
That's serious money.
or something back then.
Serious money.
And that was great, right? So
wow.
So I wrote the story back then
As
a story.
You got a head start.
As a story.
Huge head start.
And then that's in the 60s. And then in the 90s, the internet comes along, 92. I make my first internet site in 1992. We come back from living overseas. We were living in the French Caribbean for 7 years. Mm-hmm. We come back to Canada in 1992, 91. In 92, I create my first internet site. And on my first internet site, I publish Jimmy's story.
Okay.
And the reason I publish Jimmy's story is because I think there are going to be parents out there who have disabled children, and they're going to want to hear a good story, a motivational story about how well a kid can do.
Yeah.
Because at this point, even though I was born completely disabled, that I was married, that I had 2 kids, that I had a successful life, a good career, that, life goes on, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not a reason to moan and complain.
Well, and this becomes a marker and a model.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, look, when I was growing up, my father would always say to me, "What is the matter with you? Do you want people to think you're crippled?" That was his mantra.
Well, but he's a smart guy. He knew how to get at you.
That was his mantra, right? Nobody in the neighborhood where I grew up in Stratford would do anything for me unless they knew it was one of the things that I could not do. So if I fell down, which I did all the time, because I was learning how to walk so many different times, they would pick me up.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be that. If I was in a wheelchair and it tipped over, they would straighten it, they would right it, and put me back into it and say, "Be careful." If I fell down and was bleeding, they would take me in, give me a cookie, put a Band-Aid on, and send me back on the street. There was no sympathy out there. There was nobody. There was no old ladies crying for me on the street saying, "Oh my God, poor Jimmy." There was none of that in my life. None of it. Nowhere.
With respect, I would be 99.99% sure that there was some of that, but you chose either to ignore it or forget about it.
I was well cared for.
Well, and
But I think my father probably went around to them and gave them hell if they were to.
don't be nice to my son. No.
No, he would have said, "Look, these are the things he can't do." If he's coming up saying, "Can you do this or get that or do this," right? Don't, right? Because it requires a bit of stamina. I got 4 minutes. You got 4 minutes. Ask me some other questions.
You're going to have a hell of a good time with this one. And then what are you going to do with it?
Well, I'll be back and I'll record more. Because I have other stories I want to tell. So this one I haven't prompted the discussion,
Okay.
right? So what I might do is I might cheat and send you some text messages about what to ask me next time. I might do that. I'm not sure.
Less spontaneous.
I like the spontaneity of this discussion. There are some things I want to talk about that I might plant the question somehow. But there are some things that I'd like to.
Well, my fundamental question is, who's your audience? I'm having a lot of fun with this. As you know, I'm doing this other little job. And I'm doing it for twin reasons. I'm doing it for the reasons that it's a fun stage, end of life, to try to look back and, see linkages, and it's actually quite satisfying to me.
Yeah, so that's why I'm doing it, and I think that this is what I've been bugging you to do as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should do this with you.
Mm-hmm.
We should sit down and record you telling stories, and I can go through your book, and I can get questions out of that book, and I can ask you to tell those stories, and we can record it.
That would be good.
That's what we
because,
should do.
I know enough, having written version 1, about the holes, and I also know that my audience isn't as big as I was hoping. I've got siblings, cousins, children whom I am aspiring to have this for.
Yeah,
But for most of them,
they're not going to care.
no. So it's more of a, if I'm candid with myself, it's more of a personal situation.
Yeah, for me, look, if somebody listens to this, and know somebody who's gone through some difficulty,
Oh,
and they say, "Hey, here's
Oh.
this Jimmy's website where you can read this stuff,
That is a huge.
or hey, listen to this, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is two old farts in a hospital talking about, growing up in the hospital, and Jim isn't really giving much time for Brian to talk, but he sure as hell is talking a lot,
No, but I mean, with a view to the audience in your work being parents, friends, supporters of kids who need it, that's gold.
Yeah, exactly.
And that I think may be a paramount rationale if
Yeah.
you want to rank your reasons.
Yeah, so I think people don't read anymore.
That's
I
unfortunately
mean, that's
true.
so people listen and people watch, right?
Well, listen, watch, but you can't get it. Your story.
It's going to be on the YouTube. It's going to be on the internet.
Oh, okay,
It's going to be on Facebook.
okay. So maybe,
So it'll be there.
Okay.
It'll be around.
Yeah, but I mean, with what you've explained this afternoon, the audience of worried, troubled, concerned parents and friends of would be a huge one.
Yeah.
Now,
And-
in addition to the gratification that you've got of putting it all down in chronological.
Yeah. And any one of
psychological-
those kids or parents could easily contact me.
Well, if you're ready to take that, because you're more of a smart person than I'll ever be in terms of use and abuse of the net, but could you not set yourself up for an incredible trashing and sopping up all of your, and then fooling around with it and messing it up?
No,
And you can overcome that?
I can edit myself up. I can ignore the crap that's out there easily.
Okay.
Look, I mean, if yeah, it's true. There's a possibility to have a bunch of garbage come my way from doing this. Fine, but the other thing is that maybe there's going to be a couple of mothers or a couple of fathers or one or two kids, right?
Well, if you can figure out how to publicize this and get that audience tuned in, that would be gold. That would be another dimension, I suspect, because the people who are your parents of last generation are not exactly laying around looking for stuff right now. Access to them will
Right.
be a big challenge.
All right, my watch is giving me a timer. I have to go for the parking. We've been talking for 45 minutes. I'm just looking at my thing right now. So I'm going to end this now, and I'm going to go get the nurses to help me get my jacket on, and I'm going to go.
Good,
All right?
good.
See you next Tuesday, same time.
Well,
Bye. Say goodbye to the internet.
goodbye, Net. You have to be a little more.